Before we get into today's story, I just want to say, if you're watching this right now, wherever you are in Canada, drop your city in the comments below. We love knowing where our Velvet Echoes family is tuning in from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We post new stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about a woman named Beatrice Hale, and the morning she stopped pretending. He wanted her to cry. That was what she understood. Standing in the doorway of the kitchen that she had chosen the tiles for, in the house that she had helped design, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold because she had been standing there too long, watching her husband of 11 years laugh at something the woman on his phone screen had just said. He wanted her to make a scene, to raise her voice, to give him something he could use later, some evidence of instability, some reason to say, she was always like this. She was always too emotional. She was never right for me. Beatrice Hale did not cry. She set the cup down on the counter very carefully, the way she had learned to do everything over the past 3 years. Quietly, deliberately, without drawing attention to the fact that she had noticed. She walked back upstairs. She closed the bedroom door. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the birch trees along the back fence, the ones she had planted herself, the autumn after her mother died, and she breathed. She had known for 8 months, not suspected. Known. The kind of knowing that settles into your chest like a stone, and stays there. Not because you are weak, but because you are still deciding what to do about it. Beatrice was 41 years old. She had grown up in Sudbury, Ontario, the eldest daughter of a woman who ran a small accounting firm from the basement of their house, and a father who drove long haul and was home on weekends if they were lucky. She had learned early that the world did not reward loudness. It rewarded patience, precision, and the willingness to work when nobody was watching. She had a degree in biochemistry from the University of Waterloo, which she had completed on scholarship, and a second degree in biomedical engineering from McGill that she had finished in 2 years instead of 3. She had spent the next decade doing research that most people could not explain at a dinner party. The kind of work that happened in labs at strange hours, the kind that produced papers that other scientists read and built upon quietly without fanfare. She had met Wesley Drummond at a conference in Ottawa. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, as though it cost them nothing, because it doesn't. He was in finance. He wore good suits. He laughed at her jokes before she finished them, which she mistook for intelligence, and later understood was simply a habit he had developed to seem quick. She had been 30. He had been 36. She had thought she was choosing carefully. She had not been wrong about everything. He was not a cruel man in the beginning. He was negligent, which is different and in some ways harder to name. He forgot things. He minimized things. He said, "You're too sensitive, and that's not what I meant. And why do you always make everything so complicated?" Until she began to believe that she was, in fact, the problem, that her way of seeing the world was too precise, too demanding, too much. She stopped mentioning the research. He had never understood it anyway, and after a while it became easier to talk about what was for dinner. The woman on the phone was named Tara. Beatrice had figured that out in January, from a receipt she had not been looking for. She was 29 and worked in Wesley's office building, not for his firm, but for the marketing company, on the 4th floor. Beatrice had looked at her LinkedIn profile once, for about 45 seconds, and then closed the tab and never opened it again. She did not hate Tara. She found she could not work up much feeling about Tara at all, which told her something important. That what she was grieving was not the marriage she had, but the one she had believed in for a long time before the evidence became impossible to ignore. That was the thing nobody told you about this kind of betrayal. It was not sharp, it was slow. It was the accumulation of 100 small moments, a weekend trip he took alone, a phone left face down on the coffee table, a distance that grew so. Gradually you almost convinced yourself it was just the natural settling of a long relationship, the way houses shift on their foundations over years, and you stop noticing the slight lean of the doorframe. Beatrice had noticed. She had just been waiting until she was ready. What Wesley did not know what he had never thought to ask about because he had stopped asking about her work years ago, was that the research she had been doing quietly, in her own time, with a small team she had assembled herself, had produced something significant. She had not set out to build a company. She had set out to solve a problem. The problem was in targeted drug delivery, a mechanism that addressed how therapeutic compounds moved through the body, a bottleneck that had frustrated researchers for decades. Her solution was elegant in the way that real solutions tend to be. Obvious in hindsight, invisible until the right person looked at it from the right angle. She had filed the first patent 4 years ago. She had filed 3 more in the 2 years that followed. A colleague from her McGill days, a woman named Fiona who ran a small biotech consultancy in Vancouver, had seen the work and made some introductions. Those introductions had led to conversations. The conversations had led, 18 months ago, to a licensing agreement with a pharmaceutical company based in Montreal. The licensing agreement had led to a number, with several zeros, that Beatrice kept in a separate account at a separate bank, under her name only, because she had understood, even then, that the marriage was not going to last, and she intended to be careful. She was not hiding it out of malice. She was hiding it out of the same instinct that had kept her standing quietly in doorways, watching, waiting. She had spent years learning when to speak and when to hold still. She was still holding still, but not for much longer. The evening everything changed was a Thursday in March, the kind of cold gray evening that arrives in Ontario and refuses to leave, when the snow has gone, but the warmth has not yet come, and the whole world looks like it is waiting for permission to begin again. Wesley came home late. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he was not alone. He had not called. He had not texted. He simply opened the front door at 8:30 with Tara beside him, carrying a bottle of wine, laughing about something that had happened in a cab. Beatrice was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of water and a journal article she had been annotating in the margins. She looked up. Wesley stopped laughing. For a moment, all 3 of them were very still. Then Wesley said, with the particular confidence of a man who has never had to think carefully about consequences, "Tara was just dropping off some documents. She was on her way past." Tara was not on her way past. Tara lived in the opposite direction. Beatrice knew this because she had once looked it up, not out of obsession, out of the same methodical thoroughness that had made her good at her work. Looked at Tara. She looked at Wesley. She closed the journal article. "I'm going to go upstairs," Beatrice said. "You two should do whatever it is you came here to do." She said it, the way she said most things now, quietly, without heat, without performance. She walked past them both and up the stairs, and she did not look back, because she already knew everything she needed to know. And she had known it for 8 months, and tonight was simply the night the pretending stopped. She was on the phone with Fiona by 9 o'clock. "It's time," she said. Fiona was quiet for a moment, then, "The Vancouver offer?" "Yes." "You're sure?" Beatrice looked out the window at the birch trees. The last of the snow had melted from around their roots. They were bare still, but not dead, just waiting. "I've been sure for a long time," she said. "I was just waiting for the right moment." "What happened tonight?" "He brought her home." Another silence. Then Fiona said very quietly, "Okay, I'll make the call in the morning." She did not tell Wesley she was leaving. Not that night, and not the next morning when he came downstairs looking sheepish and over-casual, in the way men do when they are waiting to see how much trouble they are in. She made coffee. She asked if he wanted toast. She behaved in every observable way exactly as she always had. She had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to finalize the Vancouver transition, to move the files she needed, to make arrangements with her lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who had been recommended by Fiona, and who had the particular manner of someone who had heard every version of this story and found none of it surprising. "He'll contest the separation," Patricia said at their first meeting. "He can," Beatrice said, "but he'll find there's less to contest than he expects." The licensing income was hers. The patents were hers. The consulting fees, the equity stake in the Montreal company, the account at the separate bank. All hers, established before and during a marriage in which she had taken nothing and contributed without acknowledgement the better part of her professional life. What about the house? Patricia asked. He can have it, Beatrice said. He chose the furniture, she told him on a Sunday, not dramatically. She had thought about how to do it for a long time, and she had decided that the best way was simply the direct way without theatrics, because she had spent enough of this marriage managing his emotions, and she was not going to do it anymore. I'm leaving, she said. I filed the paperwork. You'll hear from my lawyer this week. Wesley put down his coffee. He looked at her, the way he had looked at things he did not understand throughout their marriage, with a kind of baffled irritation, as though the confusion were her fault. Beatrice, come on. What happened the other night was... Wesley, she said. I'm not talking about the other night. I'm talking about the last 3 years. He was quiet. I'm talking about a marriage that stopped being a marriage a long time ago. I'm not angry. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm just telling you that I'm leaving, and I've made arrangements, and everything will be handled through the lawyers. Where are you going? He said. Vancouver. He blinked. For what? And here was the thing. She almost didn't tell him. She almost walked out of that kitchen without another word. But she looked at him, this man she had spent 11 years beside, and she felt something that surprised her. Not anger, not bitterness, but a kind of clarity. A cleanness, like the air after rain. I'm going to run a company, she said. Wesley stared at her. What company? The one I've been building for the past 4 years while you were at work. She paused. While you were wherever you were, the silence that followed was long. She watched it move across his face, the confusion first, then something else, a scrambling recalibration. The look of a man who is trying to very quickly reconstruct a version of events in which he was not the fool. Beatrice. I'll have everything out by Friday, she said. The birch trees in the backyard were planted by me. I'd appreciate it if you left them alone. She picked up her bag from the counter. She walked to the door. She did not look back. She drove north first, which made no geographical sense if you were going to Vancouver. But she had one stop to make. Her mother's grave was in a small cemetery outside Sudbury, at the edge of a pine forest that had been there longer than the town. Beatrice parked the car and walked across the frozen ground and stood there for a while, without saying anything, because her mother had been a woman who understood the value of silence and would not have expected a speech. She had died when Beatrice was 28, before the McGill degree, before the research, before Wesley, before any of it. She had worked her whole life in that basement office, doing careful, thorough, unglamorous work, and she had told Beatrice exactly once, in the hospital near the end. Don't make yourself small so someone else feels big enough. You are not responsible for other people's ceilings. Beatrice had spent 11 years forgetting that. She stood at the grave until her feet were cold. Then she got back in the car and drove west. The news, when it came the way these things always do. Through channels. Beatrice was not watching, which is to say, through people who knew people. A colleague forwarded her a business section article from a Toronto paper. The headline was straightforward enough. A Montreal pharmaceutical company had entered into a major licensing agreement for a new drug delivery platform, one with implications across several therapeutic areas, developed by a small research team led by a biomedical engineer whose name Beatrice recognized as her own. The article described the platform as a significant advancement. It used the phrase "one of the most promising innovations" in the sector in the past decade. It mentioned the lead researcher's background, her degrees, her institutional affiliations. It did not mention Wesley Drummond, because why would it? Fiona texted her a screenshot with a single line, "Told you." Beatrice was in Vancouver by then, in a rented apartment in Kitsilano, with a view of the mountains and a kitchen that still smelled like fresh paint. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor eating takeout, because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, reading the article on her phone. And she felt not triumph, not vindication, not the hot flush of "I told you so," but something quieter, relief, maybe. The specific relief of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. She heard about Wesley through Patricia, who heard through the process of the separation itself. He had apparently spent 2 weeks in a state of what Patricia described, with professional understatement, as considerable distress. He had called Beatrice's old number several times. He had sent emails that started formally and became, in later iterations, less so. He had also, it seemed, looked up the pharmaceutical article, and then looked up the patents, and then, presumably, done some mathematics. His final message, forwarded by Patricia because it had been sent to her office, was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph was an apology. The second paragraph was an explanation. The third paragraph asked whether there was any possibility of discussing things further. Beatrice read all 3 paragraphs. She thought about them for a moment. Then she asked Patricia to reply on her behalf with a single sentence. Miss Hale wishes you well and considers the matter closed, because that was the truth of it. She did wish him well. Not in a performative way, not in the way people say things they don't mean to seem gracious. She genuinely bore him no particular ill will. She was simply done. She had been done for longer than she had admitted to herself, and now she was on the other side of it, and the sun was setting behind the mountains outside her window in colors she had not seen in years, and she had a company to run. There is a thing that happens sometimes when you have spent a long time being underestimated. You stop being angry about it, not because it stopped mattering, but because you begin to understand that the underestimation was never really about you. It was about the limits of other people's vision. You cannot be angry at someone for not being able to see what they lack the capacity to see. You can only decide that their vision is no longer your problem. Beatrice had spent 11 years in a marriage where she had been seen as a supporting character in someone else's story. The biochemistry, the patents, the years of quiet work in labs while Wesley took calls and attended dinners, and built a life that required her presence but not her participation. None of it had registered as real to him because he had never thought to look. That was his failure of imagination, not hers. The company was called Halcyon Biomedical. Fiona had suggested the name. Beatrice had liked it because Halcyon meant calm, prosperous, happy, a period of peace in the middle of turbulence. The old myth about the bird that nested on the sea. They had 12 employees by the end of they had 22 by the second. They had partnerships with 3 universities and licensing conversations with 2 American pharmaceutical firms and a collaboration underway with a hospital in Calgary that Beatrice flew to meet in person every 6 weeks. She worked long hours. She ate well. She ran along the seawall in the mornings and stood on the roof of the parking garage near her office on clear days and looked at the mountains. She called her sister in Sudbury every Sunday. She was slowly and then all at once herself again, the self she had put in storage somewhere around year 3 of the marriage, the self who moved through the world with the confidence of a person who knew exactly how much her work was worth. She was not lonely exactly. She was alone in ways that required adjustment. But she had learned, in the years since her mother died, that there is a kind of solitude that is not loneliness, that is simply the experience of being entirely present in your own life, without the static of other people's expectations. She had not been present in her own life for a long time. She was present now. She saw Wesley once more. About 14 months after she left, she was in Toronto for a conference, staying at a hotel near the convention center. She was in the lobby bar waiting for a colleague when he walked in with 2 other men she didn't recognize. Mid-conversation, not looking her way. He looked the same, maybe a little thinner. He was wearing the gray suit she had always liked. She watched him for a moment. He glanced around the room in the way people do in hotel lobbies, a reflex, not looking for anything specific. His gaze moved across the bar and then came back and stopped. He saw her. The moment was brief, a few seconds at most. She saw something move through his expression. Recognition, then something more complicated, and then she looked away, back toward the entrance, because her colleague was coming through the door and she stood up to meet him. She did not look back at Wesley. She did not need to. Later that night, she sat in her hotel room and thought about what she felt. If only because she had always been rigorous about understanding things, including herself. What she felt was not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief, because relief requires that something has been resolved, and she had resolved this herself months ago. In a kitchen in Ontario, with a bag over her shoulder. What she felt was something closer to sorrow. A quiet, clear-eyed grief for something that had been real. Once a marriage that had started with actual hope. Between two people who had, in their own limited ways, chosen each other. It had not been enough. He had not been enough, and she, too careful, too contained, too much of herself hidden away in labs and journals, and a private account at a private bank, had perhaps not been enough either, in the ways that marriages require. That was the honest version. The version she told herself at night, alone, because she no longer had anyone to lie to. She had not been only a victim. She had also been a woman who had spent 3 years knowing something was wrong in choosing, for complicated reasons that made sense to her at the time, to stay. She owned that. She didn't blame herself for it. She understood the reasons, the fear, the inertia, the grief of losing something you had wanted even after you know it has already been lost, but she owned it, because owning it was the only way to learn from it. The birch trees, she thought. She hoped he had left the birch trees. Fiona gave a toast at the Halcyon Biomedical first anniversary dinner. She said, "You built this, in the spaces between everything else, in the margins, in the time nobody gave you credit for. That's how you know it's yours." Beatrice sat at the head of a table of 23 people. Researchers, engineers, administrators, a 26-year-old from Edmonton who reminded her sharply of herself at that age, and she thought about margins, about all the years she had worked in them, about her mother in the basement office in Sudbury, about the notebooks that Wesley had never opened, about the birch trees, about the particular way a life accumulates, not in the large gestures but in the small ones, the patient one, the quiet ones, the ones that happen when nobody is watching. She raised her glass, she said, "Thank you, all of you. Let's get back to work." And they laughed, because by then they knew her well enough to know she meant it. And they were the right people, and this was the right room. And outside, the Vancouver rain was falling soft and steady, against the windows, like it had been waiting a long time to be let in.